listeners, it's Kathryn Jane here with our first edition of Page to Politics. This is a podcast that provides a place for real conversation in the old-fashioned sense of the word. We discuss literature and touch on society and politics that often surround an author's writings. These podcasts are inspired by the great long-form conversational interviews of the 20th century, from Michael Parkinson's conversations with Orson Welles to the great BBC discussions with writers, artists and thinkers. There'll be no scripts masquerading as spontaneity, no talking points approved by a committee, no blue tape marking out where a thought is allowed to go and where it isn't. Just people, ideas, books and the occasional disagreement. Tonight, I'm joined by our resident author, Richard Arterton. Hi, Rich.
Hello.
Whose novel, Where the Sky Still Waits, has given us plenty to talk about, and we intend to do exactly that. Over the coming months, we'll also be welcoming other writers, thinkers, artists, and interesting characters to our table. But Richard is where our story begins. So, let's go back to a space of real conversation. A space that feels borrowed from another age. A dark room, a glass of whiskey, the faint glow of a lamp, and two minds wandering through the territory most people avoid. Leave the world at the door, take a seat in the dark. Let's begin.
Well, love that intro. Am I allowed to smoke? I've got tea though, I haven't got whiskey.
We welcome it, Rich. We welcome it.
Good.
Good afternoon, Richard Arterton. May I call you Rich?
Yeah, of course.
I think I've already taken the liberty in the
Yeah.
introduction. Thank you for being our resident author.
Okay.
Please can I start by asking you, for our listeners, to give us a brief synopsis of your latest book, Where the Sky Still Waits.
Yes, thank you. It's a novel about a art academic and lecturer, Stan Harrington, whose life is completely about order and regularity, repetition. He has his coffee, he wakes up 5 minutes before his alarm every day, has coffee, same time, has exactly the same breakfast, listens to the same Radio 4 show on the way to work, and he maintains that conformity and order throughout the beginning of the novel. As two things happen, basically. Firstly, this is set in contemporary UK, so the social contract between him and the not just him, but people and things around him start to fail. So government doesn't deliver anymore. The NHS doesn't deliver anymore. The police service has become so politicised, it's tied itself up in knots and doesn't really know how to function anymore. The educational system, of which he's part of, doesn't know how to proceed. It's banning smartphones at the same time being taken over by AI, so there's great confusion there. And the second part is that he falls in love. As a volunteer, he works doing evening classes, doing English lessons for asylum seekers. And he meets Bill, who is from Uganda, and he, very unexpectedly, falls in love, and he's not quite sure how to deal with that. He's had those feelings suppressed for many years and just thought that's never going to happen for him. And even though Bill is from somewhere where there's so much disgust for gay people, or homophobic country generally, the authorities, he is the one who comes to the UK and is open and comfortable with those feelings. And it's Stan who is in a country that has traditionally, of late, been okay with, or much more progressive about sexuality, although that has sort of maybe curtailed in the last few years. He's the one who is perhaps less open about his sexuality. So Bill helps Stan in that sense. And when Bill is faced with being sent back, deported by a kind of reform-style government, and it is Stan who therefore can try and help Bill, and he tries to help him not get deported. Unfortunately, they're not successful in that sense, and he is deported back to Uganda. So it's about that relationship really, and how they try and maintain that, and also the legal and political process of trying to keep Bill in the country, or keep him safe when he gets sent back to Uganda. So that's it really.
Thanks, Rich. I have read it myself, and it is a very sensitively written story.
Thank you.
It's also quite political. It's quite relatable at the moment. People might hear stories or be experiencing things like that at the moment. But for you, can I ask if there was something that inspired you to write this book? Why did you write this story?
Yeah, it's twofold really. I began to think about it. A philosophy lecturer friend lent me a book by Jean-Paul Sartre called Nausea. I don't know if you've read it, but it tells the story of Antoine Roquette. No, I might be saying that wrong.
Uh-huh.
But it's kind of a sad and socially isolated intellectual type who's on a job, he's writing a biography. And he becomes increasingly alienated and disillusioned with events that are happening around him, so he feels the, quote, nausea. And I think that's where the idea of Stan really came from. Someone who thinks he knows the world, he's studied it a lot, he's studied history, he's studied art and culture. But those things become less and less important. As Gove says, we've had enough of experts. And when you look around, with the advent of social media, and recently experts are influencers rather than traditional academics. And that's reflected, I think, in the Stan character. And with regards to the Nausea novel, I said to my friend, well, nothing really happens. And she said, exactly, excitedly. So I began to think again about the art academic, what would happen when the world starts to fall apart around him. Because in a lot of us at the moment, we can look around and see things utterly falling apart. And I think a lot of people now feel powerless. And, you can see in this country, we've kind of lost our way a little bit, lost our soul. And I actually began to think to write it because I was on holiday in Greece, and there was a barman at the adult pool. It's an adult pool because there were no kids there. I mean, I don't mean like it was an adult pool for any other reason. But I would just sit having a drink. You know that lovely moment when you're on holiday, when you've been in the sun all day, and then just before you go for dinner, and you're waiting for everyone to get ready, so you have a drink. I love that moment. There's kind of a peace and serenity about it. And I would just sit at this very small shack bar, and this guy, the bartender, was a guy called Sam, and he was very patient, very slow. He knew exactly when to talk to someone, when not to. Everything was in control and ordered. He knew when to top up your drink. He knew when you didn't want to have your drink top up. He was just really expert. And I can't put my finger on it exactly, but just spending time in his presence, it made me really form that character, something about him. So thank you, Sam, for that. I appreciate that. So that was the influence, really. And it's the topics discussed in it, with immigration, asylum seekers, is very topical at the moment, certainly, because there's one side of the argument being told constantly, which is Reform's side, and the left, like Labour, are so terrified of the subject they don't know what to do, so they have a Home Secretary who's making out these sort of landish policies, and the base of the Labour Party don't really agree with it. I think there's some argument to be said that immigration is not felt by people like the Prime Minister or the Prime Ministers of past, because they don't see immigration. If you go into Luton or Northampton, Birmingham, Leicester, any town or small city across the country, then that's where you really see immigration, and people don't want to talk about it because they're so terrified of offending anyone. So the argument has been this complete vacuum, really, of any kind of progressive conversation. Because at the moment you have Farage and his getting so much support across red wall Labour areas because they are filling it with all their political rhetoric, and the only really other side is Zach Polanski and the Greens, who says we should have open borders. Well, where's the middle ground? We've got to be able to talk about this subject without A, being offended, or B, trampling over people's human rights. Because you have Reform saying that they're going to send people home, deport them. And it's like, well, what if they've had a child here who's British? What if they've married someone? You're going to send the whole family away? You're just going to send an individual away? So there needs to be much more discussion on this, and people being able to discuss it without being called names, without people being ultra offended and getting angry. We need to be able to have these discussions without being angry. So the novel is set on that political backdrop. I guess it's kind of set 3 years in the future where you have a Reform government.
It's interesting, and what you've given me there, I imagine that all of the listeners are relating to, and it is something that can make us very angry, very passionate, if it has touched our lives or those around us. So
you see it in the flags everywhere. Just coming here today, you come from Kettering, which has Union Jacks everywhere, and then Northampton, where you have a lot of you have flags from all over the world, really. Palestinian flags and the African flags. But people clearly, they are passionate about this, even if they're not saying it out loud.
And you're right, we do need to talk about it, but how we talk about it to avoid this passionate arguments that can arise. You have found a way as an author, I think, in your writing to write about this in a sensitive way, and you've just spoken about how you read that story, Nausea, and you said that nothing happened, and you've kind of taken that stillness and put it into your book around a very evocative subject. And you've
I did have one review
people
that said
discussing
it needs more plot, and I deliberately have sort of shied away from that. It's not an events-based novel. It's a one that's around ideas and experience, hopefully philosophy, hopefully art. I mean, that shouldn't be underplayed, the cultural aspect of it, rather than it being a kind of Jason Bourne kind of, what's that guy's, a Jack Reacher style thriller.
And I wouldn't want our listeners to think that this is just a political book about a topic, because I think what I find interesting about your writing is the delicate brush that you use to talk about such a heavy subject. And I think it's brave to write in the way that you have. So I'm interested to know, as your next question, I'm interested to know if there are authors that have inspired you and why.
Yes, certainly. I mean, my traditional go-to kind of inspirations would be people like Ian McEwan. I remember that feeling reading Amsterdam for the first time, or Saturday, or Atonement. Books that really stay with you and so intelligently written. Patrick Gale, I'm a big fan of his. I like Beware of Pity by Stefan Zweig, Jan Martel, people like that. And also people not traditional authors, people like Peter Cook or Peter Sellers. Lots of people called Peter, really. Peter Sissons, Peter Gabriel, Peter Schmeichel. And when I was doing my masters, I read. That was the great thing about doing my masters. Actually, was reading authors that I wouldn't ordinarily read. So I read Anita Desai's short stories collection, which I absolutely adored. Chekhov. I think probably the most direct influence was Johann Hari's book Lost Connections, which suggests that in our modern contemporary world we've lost connections, and that might be the cause of mental health problems and stress, rather than a medical thing like you have to take antidepressants. We could become more of a community again. And there's a particular chapter in that story that really influenced me, and it's a story from 2011. It's about this concrete social housing area in Berlin, an area called Kotti, and a woman called Nureri Senzig put a sign in her window saying in 1 week's time she was going to kill herself. The council had put the rents up and she was going to be evicted, so she decided to end it. Now, this estate in Cotty was like the Bronx or East London. In fact, at most town centres now. People didn't talk, neighbours nod at each other and triple lock their doors. Anyway, after Sensit put this sign up, some of the residents started to knock on her door to see if she was all right. What was interesting is that all these sections of this fringe society came together, people who would never ordinarily have come together. The Turkish workers who built the city, the left-wing squatters, the gay community, the teenage single mums, all these different people who could identify with Nuri's struggle. So they set up a roadblock in protest. And when the police threatened to take it down, they had to man the blockade. So they made a timetable and they took it in turns, in pairs, to man the blockade. The single mother with the punk, the Turkish builder with the homosexual. People who would never normally talk or even look at each other were now united by a common goal. And a community flourished. And due to their activism, their coming together, the rents were frozen. The council backed down. Everywhere else in Berlin, the rents went up. But not in Cotty, because they had come together and made that connection. Because there is a complacency at the moment in this country, perhaps in the Western world, perhaps all over the world, I don't know. The sense that in the UK, that we've lost our nerve, we've become too passive politically. I noticed in France, if they try and raise the speed limit, try and lower the speed limit, they block the roads and set fire to the cars. They protest there, but in the UK we seem to become so passive about politics. Think about what Boris Johnson was allowed to get away with. Even during lockdown, you saw how people are just so compliant. They just do as they're told, and they don't stand up for themselves like we used to. So what I would like to see, really, not that this is a protest novel in any way, but just in general in the country, I'd just like to see people standing up and saying no. Because people are getting really angry. You can see how angry people are. But, we want real change rather than anger. You don't want violence, you want change. I think so. Yeah, that was definitely a influence.
Thanks, Rich. It's interesting that you talk about the importance of connections, especially in these marginalised communities, and how people come together through struggle, adversity, and I see that in your book. I see that as I'm listening to you and what I have read from The Sky Still Waits, in both the story that you've just told me and The Sky Still Waits, there's a sense of hope from the people. And I just wonder, when you were writing this latest book, through a lot of adversity, discrimination, and a kind of sense of injustice, how did you remain hopeful? How did you keep that sense of hope? Because I imagine that for some authors it would be very, very easy to go down, would you say, a nihilistic kind of point
definitely.
of view. But you kept hope. How did you do that?
Well, it was difficult. I didn't always manage it. But, that's a good question, really, because when you imagine this, it doesn't need to be a dystopian future government, because we're kind of almost already there, because politics is utterly broken, and you could almost argue society is breaking down hugely. When I saw reactions to various criminal things that have happened recently, it's the first thought I had was oh my God, are we going to head towards a civil war? Are you seeing that in the USA already? And so to write something with a hopeful end, I think in the novel you'll notice that if there is hope or optimism, it is not in government, it's in individuals. And it's, at its heart, I hope the novel is a love story. And that's where the optimism and hope lies. Because one of the nice things about getting Oscar the collie dog recently is that you get to talk to strangers. You have to with a puppy, because the puppy, Oscar, certainly runs up to people. So I'm forced to talk to people you wouldn't normally do. You might say good morning or hello as you pass someone, but if you have dogs, you talk to strangers. And what you realise is that most people are great and nice, and they're not politically extreme on either pole, left or right. You know, they just want kindness and happiness and love, and that's what kept me hopeful, that the love story at the heart of the novel is the hope and optimism. And if people can look after each other, and people can have community and connection, then that will hopefully get us through. But I think it's an important kind of note to add at the end, that the optimism doesn't lie in government.
Okay.
Or politicians.
I'm just going to ask you a more kind of deep question before we go on to our light-hearted round.
Okay.
Where I will ask you 60 seconds off script of some more light-hearted, fun questions just
Okay,
to loosen you up. But I'm just going to ask you one more deep question after listening to what you've said, and just to summarise what I'm going to take away. Maybe listeners might do too.
I'll just open my Diet Coke.
Open your
Okay.
Diet Coke.
Yeah.
So, from what you were just describing to me, it sounds like hope is, you're saying it comes from love, it comes from people, it comes from connections. It doesn't come from government, it doesn't come from policy. So would you say that it's our collective responsibility as individuals to build hope and speak to passers-by and etc., etc.? Or would you say that there is any kind of responsibility on the government and policy? I know that's a bit of a question I've just thrown it in there, but I just thought, after listening to what you've said, I'm interested to know that before I go on to some lighter questions.
Well, it's a good question, but it's hard for politicians to legislate kindness. It's not their jobs to do that, but it is their jobs to create the culture and the environment where kindness and love can flourish, and that's what they should be doing. I noticed that libraries don't open in the evenings.
Do you know that David Cameron nearly brought in something like this once?
Legislate for love.
He was approached by, I think, Martin Seligman, who was a psychologist, who said that he could create a happy society, not hopeful, happy society. And you would start by doing a census and asking questions across the country to see what makes them happy, to see what we could change, so we could make policies to make people's lives better in that way. Maybe we can't, maybe we can.
And what happened with that?
That's why I'm interested. It didn't happen. I think something happened to David Cameron.
Brexit.
It's something that I wonder if could be in.
Well, that sounds like a good idea. I think anything that gets people connecting with one another, like things like youth clubs, which we don't have anymore. My local community centre, I don't see being used very much. I like, with my children, I never liked Alton Towers or bowling, any organised fun. It's like, just go out into a park with a ball and, go forests and things like that. I think anything that gets people talking off social media, then I think that's positive. But I think you need libraries and you need youth clubs, and you see this in villages, you see it less in towns. I think people coming together. I think villages are quite good. You have those phone boxes which are now book libraries and things like that. It's just anything that just holds out a hand, holds out a connection.
I love that, holds out a hand, yes.
Yeah, and Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." I think we are very much in an era where we need to encourage the bend. I think he actually borrowed that from Theodore Parker, but we need to, certainly a government needs to legislate and needs to go faster at the moment, because people are unhappy, they're struggling, the cost of living, it's hard to have fun and enjoy yourself when you've got credit card debts you can't pay, or you're just trying to keep the water on. So they certainly need to make things happier and easier then. And giving a discount to Alton Towers is not the way forward. And they just need to make things easier and make our communities more cohesive and come together more.
So you don't think we should get people to come together through organised fun, because now we're going to do that.
Okay.
So now it's time for our quick fun
I didn't know you were
60-second off script.
I didn't know you were a professional percussionist. That was amazing.
Oh, yeah. A little bit more for everyone. So now it's time for our 60-second off script questions, where sometimes our guest gives most away. So
Okay,
I'm going to
scared.
fire at you a few offbeat questions, and I'd like you to answer most honestly.
Yeah, I will. I'll endeavour to do that.
Okay, question 1.
Yeah.
Rich. If Nigel Farage, Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham were ice creams, what would they be and why?
Okay. Well, Nigel Farage would be white. He'd be a white Magnum. Who was the second one? Keir
Starmer.
Oh, well, that would be something. Oh, I'm sorry, Keir, but it'd be something very plain and ordinary. I think it'd be. I'll tell you what it'd be. It'd be a 99, but oh no, sorry, we haven't got any flakes left. Do you still want it? Yeah, I'll have it. All right, thanks.
Okay,
Do you want any
there we are,
sauce?
Keir.
Definitely
99 with no flake.
Vanilla. And Andy Burnham, well, he would be something probably quite cool and exciting. I'm thinking like Vimto lolly dipped in like Coke or something. Something exciting and cool.
Okay, you've created your own ice cream there for Andy. Interesting.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, so next question.
Yeah.
If I was to drop you across the sky with my big hands into a film,
Let's go
what
already.
film would you like to be dropped into?
Oh
Any
my
movie in the history of
God.
time, and where would you like to be? Could you
Oh
tell
my
me?
God. Wow, that's a good question. I'm just thinking of movies I like now, but that's not what it is. I don't want to be dropped into a zombie apocalypse in Shaun of the Dead. Sam Neill died today, so I'm thinking Jurassic Park, but they nearly get eaten by dinosaurs, so probably not that. Maybe like I don't know. What's that Woody Allen film, Midnight in Blue? You know, when they go back in time? Is it Midnight in Blue? I quite like that one. Something from the 60s, maybe Hard Day's Night.
Okay.
Or the Peter Cook Dudley Moore one. Something from the swinging 60s. Magical Mystery Tour. I'll be on the bus in the Magical Mystery Tour.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so
Do you know
another
that
question
reference?
for
Have you
you.
seen that
Yes.
film?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sort of. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's go to the next question.
Bedazzled
Good
is the
answer.
Peter Cook film. Yeah.
Next question.
This is hard. Yeah.
Your writing, for anyone who's read it, might relate to what I'm saying here. I do often feel that it's a bit like wandering through a page. You don't direct me. I feel like you're using a fine brush. It's almost like a painting. So I'd like to ask you, if your book was a painting, what would it be?
Oh, great question. It would be. I know the answer straight away. It would be Nighthawk's Edward Hopper.
Could you describe that for our listeners?
Yeah. I'm looking at it now because it's on my wall. But it's a late night bar. It's actually discussed in the book. That's why it's so easy for me. It'd be probably any Edward Hopper because it's got that sense of isolation, which I think Sam Harrington has at the start. And you've got a kind of Don Draper figure. They must have based it on this painting, I don't know. But sitting at the end of a bar, and you've got a couple talking to a barman who looks a bit like a sailor, actually. But it just sums up the isolation, I think, and really is the catalyst for the novel, because you want, by the end of the novel, for the lights to be turned up on a Hopper painting and people to be surrounding the person. So I'll go for any Edward Hopper painting, but particularly Nighthawks.
Thank you, Rich. Good answer. So now I'm going to read you something from one of my favourite authors, Edward Lear.
Oh God. Okay.
And
Is it going to make any sense?
It's a nonsense poem. And I'd like you, as our expert author, to explain the nonsense for me.
Well, hang on. If it's nonsense, is it inexplicable?
You're an author. I would like some clarity put on this nonsense.
Okay.
So, the poem is: there was an old man with a nose who said, "If you choose to suppose that my nose is too long, you are certainly wrong. That remarkable man with a nose So could you explain that for me?
That's very deep. Very deep. So, man with a big nose. Was it a man who is a nose or a man with a big nose? Sorry.
I'm just holding up a picture for Rich here,
Yeah.
and what the illustration shows is a man, a rather portly man with a long nose that's kind of like as long as a big worm, and it's longer than anyone would expect.
He looks like Mr. Creosote from the Monty Python sketch.
He is an old man with a nose who
George
said, if you
Orwell
choose to suppose
Yeah.
that my nose is too long, you're certainly wrong. That remarkable man with a nose. So,
Well, he is a remarkable man, and I like his self-confidence. He has got a very long nose.
okay, thank you. That was just to lighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, he looks like, honestly, he looks like Terry Jones in the Mr. Creosote sketch. But imagine he's got an extremely long red nose. I don't know what Edward Lear. Perhaps it might have been a gentle satire of Victorian society.
Okay, that's interesting.
Where was he?
Yes, you're
Was
right.
he Victorian?
The Victorians did enjoy satire,
Yeah.
partly because the world was so dark and a lot of death, etc.
And it probably didn't smell very nice.
No,
Oscar's crying.
no.
He's got his bone.
Has he got a comb?
A what?
A comb.
Well, if that's what you call it. I mean, he's only young. He's growing it.
No, we need to buy him a comb. You know, and you put the food inside it and they spend ages trying to get it out. So, before I end our podcast, could I ask for our listeners, if they wish to buy your book, where could they get it?
The book is available now on Kindle, Amazon, all the amazing bookshops that you can think of. And there's obviously The Old Sun as well, my first novel, and 2 other poetry collections.
Oh, yes.
If you are so inclined.
Yeah, could you just mention those for me?
Yeah, there's one called, the first one's called Mile End, and that is poetry. A lot of it is landscape and where I've been on my travels at that time, and I kind of like to link that to what's going on in the world, or maybe in my world. So at the time it was Mile End, but there's in the second collection, The Wetlands, there's Amsterdam and places like that. I don't know if you can hear, but Oscar is singing outside the door.
Yeah, that means it's time for the end of the podcast.
Yeah, because
it's time to
he
feed
says
the puppy.
you've gone on enough
Yes.
now. It's time to finish.
He kind of keeps you in check, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So, as the hour grows late, and with all good conversations, we'll leave a few thoughts unfinished until next time. My thanks to Richard Arterton for joining us. This has been Page to Politics, a conversation presented and produced by Lima Books. So until we meet again, listeners, keep reading, keep questioning, and don't be afraid to follow an interesting idea wherever it leads. So good night, sleep well, and dream. As Shakespeare said in The Tempest, we are such stuff as dreams are made on.